Hello all and welcome back to Tangents on Cracked Spines. If you're new here, I'm happy for you to be. As a quick intro, I'm Frankie and we'll be reading with unedited personal commentary pretty much anything in the public domain. Today we actually have another mini episode. It's for Martin Luther King Day, which I know I'm a little behind on, but I don't know which is kicking my butt more, the infection or the antibiotics to treat it. And of course the speech that I found that I wanted to read, which seems to be listed as the MLK 50 speech. Doesn't seem to have a transcript that I've been able to easily find. So it's just his typed out version that's been scanned with all of his handwritten changes. And while I can read cursive, it's not the best way to try and read a speech. Anyways, so this was his speech that he gave Tuesday, July 6th, 1965 at the United Church of Christ. America has brought the nation and the world to an awe-inspiring threshold of the future. Through our scientific technological genius, we have built gigantic bridges to span the seas and gargantuan buildings to kiss the skies. We have dwarfed distance and placed time in chains. We have carved highways through the stratosphere. Through the marvelous advances of medical science, we have been able to cure many dread plagues and diseases, alleviate our pain, prolong our lives, and make for greater security and physical well-being. This is a dazzling picture of America's scientific progress. And before I go further, this is like a 20-page speech. It's double-spaced, but it's still like a 20-page speech, so buckle up. But when we turn to the question of progress in the area of race relations, we face one of the most shameful chapters of the American scene. In spite of the jet-like pace of our scientific and technological development, we still creep at horse and buggy speed in human relations. We must face the melancholy fact that 102 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, the Negro is still dominated politically, exploited economically, segregated and humiliated. Negroes, North and South, still live in segregation, housed in unendurable slums, eat in segregation, pray in segregation, and die in segregation. How much of our national life can be summarized in that arresting phrase of the great Thoreau: improved means to an unimproved end. Through our scientific genius, we have made of the world a neighborhood, but we have failed to employ our moral and spiritual genius to make of it a brotherhood. The problem of race and color prejudice remains America's chief moral dilemma. The tragic dilemma presents the church with a great challenge. In the final analysis, the problem of race is not a political, but a moral issue. As the chief moral guardian of the community, the church must work with passionate determination to solve this problem. The task of conquering segregation is an inescapable must confronting organized religion. It has always been the responsibility of the church to broaden horizons, challenge the status quo, and break the mores when necessary. We are called to be thermostats that transform and regulate the temperature of society, not thermometers that merely record or register the temperature of majority opinion. That hasn't changed. Honesty impels us to admit that religious bodies in America have not always been faithful to their prophetic mission on the question of racial justice. In this area, the church has failed Christ miserably. In the midst of a nation rife with racial animosity, it too often has been content to mouth pious irrelevancies and sanctimonious frivolities. Called to combat social evils, it has often remained silent behind the safe security of stained glass windows. Called to lead men on the highway of brotherhood and to summon them to rise above the narrow confines of race and class, it has often been an active participant in shaping and crystallizing the patterns of the race caste system. It has so often cast the mantle of its sanctity over the system of segregation. In some communities of the South, many churches are the ready lackeys of the state governments. In defiance of the Supreme Court's desegregation decisions, they allow their religious education buildings to be used for private segregated schools. Nothing so completely reveals the pathetic irrelevancy of the church. Nothing so sharply illustrates the eclipse of its spiritual power as its failure to take a forthright stand on the question of racial justice, and how often the church has been an echo rather than a voice, a taillight behind the Supreme Court and other secular agencies rather than a headlight guiding men progressively and decisively to higher levels of understanding. If the church does not participate actively in the struggle for economic and racial justice, it will forfeit the loyalty of millions and cause men everywhere to say that it has atrophied its will. In short, the church must decide whether it will assume the role of leadership or the role of pious irrelevancy. The church must decide whether it will aggressively lead men along the path of brotherhood, or whether it will remain more cautious than courageous, and more prone to follow the expedient than the ethical way. Now, reminder that this is written by a minister, the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. So, he is talking about this from inside the organization that he is hoping to change, or was hoping to change. Of course, there are always those who will argue that the church should not get mixed up in such earthly, temporal matters as social and economic improvement. Because it's totally not like Jesus did that or anything. There are still all too many churches following a theology which stresses the total and hopeless depravity of all mundane existence, and which admonish men to seek salvation and escape from social life, and in preparation for a hereafter wherein all wrongs will be automatically righted. But however sincere, this view of religion is all too confined. Certainly, otherworldly concerns have a deep and significant place in all religions worthy of the name. Religion, at its best, deals not only with the relations of man to his fellow men, but with the relations of man to the universe and to ultimate reality. But a religion true to its nature must also be concerned about man's social conditions. Religion deals not only with the hereafter, but also with the here. Here, where the precious lives of men are still sadly disfigured by poverty and hatred. Here, where millions of God's children are being consigned to degradation and injustice, and where the habitation of men is filled with agony and anguish. Any religion that professes to be concerned about a future good over yonder and is not concerned about the present evils over here is a spiritually morbid religion only waiting for the day to be buried. Such a religion is the kind the Marxists like to see, an opiate of the people. Now, let us turn to some of the specific things that the church can do to face the challenges of this day. First, they must make it palpably clear that segregation is morally wrong and sinful, and that it stands against all of the noble precepts of our Judeo-Christian tradition. This includes the legal segregation of the South as well as the de facto segregation of the North. There are at least two reasons why Christianity must affirm the immorality of segregation. The first has to do with the sacredness of human personality. Deeply rooted in our religious heritage is the conviction that every man is an heir to a legacy of dignity and worth. Our Judeo-Christian tradition refers to this inherent dignity of man in the biblical term of the image of God. The innate worth referred to in the phrase the image of God is universally shared in equal proportions by all men. There is no graded scale of essential worth. There is no divine right of one race which differs from the divine right of another. Every human being has etched in his personality the indelible stamp of the Creator. Every man must be respected because God loves him. The worth of an individual does not lie in the measure of his intellect, his racial origin, or his social position. Human worth lies in relatedness to God. An individual has value because he has value to God. Whenever this is recognized, whiteness and blackness pass away as determinants in a relationship, and son and brother are substituted. Segregation stands diametrically opposed to the principle of the sacredness of human personality. It debases personality. Immanuel Kant said in one formulation of the categorical imperative that all men must be treated as ends and never as mere means. The tragedy of segregation is that it treats men as means rather than ends, and thereby reduces them to things rather than persons. I mean, we still have that in class segregation. To use the words of the late Martin Buber, segregation substitutes an I-it relationship for the I-thou relationship. The colloquialism of the Southern landed gentry that referred to slaves and Negro labor as hands betrays the thing quality assigned to Negroes under the system. Herein lies the root of paternalism that persists even today. The traditional Southerner is fond of his Negro as he is a pet or a finely tooled firearm. It serves as a purpose or gets a job done. The only concern is performance, not well-being. But man is not a thing. He must be dealt with not as an animated tool, but as a person sacred in himself. To do otherwise is to depersonalize the potential person and desecrate what he is. So long as the Negro or the member of any other oppressed group is treated as a means to an end, so long as he is seen as anything less than a person of sacred worth, the image of God is abused in him and consequently and proportionally lost by those who inflict the abuse. A second reason why segregation is morally wrong is that it deprives man of that quality which makes him man, namely freedom. The very character of the life of man demands freedom. In speaking of freedom at this point, I am not referring to the freedom of... The page didn't load. Give me a minute. Alright. In speaking of freedom at this point, I am not referring to the freedom of a thing called the will. The very phrase, freedom of the will, abstracts freedom from the person to make it an object. An object, almost by definition, is not free, but freedom cannot thus be abstracted from the person, who is always subject as well as object, and who himself still does the abstracting. So I am speaking of the freedom of man, the whole man, and not the freedom of a function called the will. Neither am I implying that there are no limits to freedom. Freedom always operates within the limits of an already determined structure. Thus, the mathematician is free to draw a circle, but he is not free to make a circle square. A man is free to walk through an open door, but he is not free to walk through a brick wall. A man is free to go to Chicago or New York, but he is not free to go to both cities at one and the same time. Freedom is always within destiny. It is the chosen fulfillment of our destined nature. We are always both free and destined. With these qualifications, we return to the assertion that the essence of man is found in freedom. That is what Paul Tillich means when he affirms man is man because he is free. Or what Tolstoy implies when he says, I cannot conceive of a man not being free unless he is dead. So what is freedom? It is, first, the capacity to deliberate or weigh alternatives. Shall I be a doctor or a lawyer? Shall I vote for this candidate or the other candidate? Shall I be a Democrat, Republican, or socialist? Shall I be a humanist or a theist? Moment by moment, we go through life engaged in this strange conversation with ourselves. Second, freedom expresses itself in decision. The word decision, like the word incision, involves the image of cutting. It does. Incision means to cut in. Decision means to cut off, I suppose. When I make a decision, I cut off alternatives and make a choice. The existentialists say we must choose, that we are choosing animals, and if we do not choose, we sink into thinghood and the mass mind. A third expression of freedom is responsibility. This is the obligation of the person to respond if he is questioned about his decisions. No one else can respond for him. He alone must respond, for his acts are determined neither by something outside him nor by any part of him, but by the center totality of his being. From this analysis, we can clearly see the blatant immorality of segregation. It is a selfishly contrived system which cuts off one's capacity to deliberate, decide, and respond. The absence of freedom is the imposition of restraint on my deliberations as to what I shall do, where I shall live, or the kind of task I shall pursue. I am robbed of the basic quality of manness when I cannot choose what I shall do, or where I shall live, or how I shall survive. It means, in fact, that someone or some system has already made these a priori decision for me, and I am reduced to an animal. The only resemblances I have to real life are the motor responses and functions that are akin to humankind. I cannot adequately assume responsibility as a person because I have been made the party to a decision in which I played no part in making. Not to be sure, this may be hyperbole to a certain extent. Not now to be sure. But only to underscore what actually happens when a man is robbed of his freedom. The very nature of his life is altered, and his being cannot make the full circle of personhood because that which is basic to the character of life itself has been diminished. This is why segregation has wreaked havoc with the Negro. It is sometimes difficult to determine which are the deepest, the physical wounds or the psychological wounds. Only a Negro can understand the social leprosy that segregation inflicts upon them. The suppressed fears and resentments and the expressed anxieties and sensitivities make each day of life a turmoil. Every confrontation with the restrictions is another emotional battle in a never-ending war. He is shackled in his waking moments to tiptoe stance, never quite knowing what to expect next. Is there any argument to support the withdrawing of life quality from groups because of the color of their skin or the texture of their hair or any external characteristic which has nothing to do with, at all, with the life quality? Certainly not on the grounds of morality, justice, or religion. Nothing can be more diabolical than a deliberate attempt to destroy in any man his will to be a man and to withhold from him that something that constitutes his true essence. The churches have an opportunity and a duty to lift up their voices like a trumpet and declare unto the people the immorality of segregation. We must affirm that every human life is a reflex of divinity, and every act of injustice mars and defaces the image of God in man. The undergirding philosophy of segregation is diametrically opposed to the undergirding philosophy of Christianity, and all the dialects of the logicians cannot make them lie down together. Another thing that the churches can do to make the ideal of brotherhood a reality is to get to the ideational roots of racial prejudice. All race hate is based on fears, suspicions, and misunderstandings that are usually groundless. The church can do a great deal to direct the popular mind at this point. Through their channels of religious education, they can point out the irrationality of these beliefs. They can show that the idea of a superior or inferior race is a myth that has been completely refuted by anthropological evidence. They can show that Negroes are not innately inferior in academic, health, or moral standards, and that they are not inherently criminal. The church can say to their worshippers that poverty and ignorance breed crime, whatever the racial group may be, and that is a torturous logic to use the tragic results of segregation as an argument for its continuation. A third effort that the church can make in attempting to solve the race problem is to take the lead in social reform. It is not enough for religious institutions to be active in the realm of ideas. They must move out into the arena of life and do battle for their sanctities. First, the church must remove the yoke of segregation from its own body. Only by doing this can it be effective in its attack on outside evils. It is trite to say, but shamefully true, that in all too many instances, the most segregated hour of America is 11 o'clock on Sunday morning, the same hour when many Christians are standing to sing, "In Christ there is no east or west," and the most segregated school of the week is the Sunday school. How often the church has had a high blood pressure of creeds and an anemia of deeds. I like that sentence. There has been some progress. More and more churches are courageously making attacks on segregation and actively integrating their congregations. But these stands must still be enlarged. The churches must become increasingly active in social actions outside its doors. They must take an active stand against the injustices and indignities that the Negro and other non-white minorities confront in housing, education, police protection, and in city and state courts. They must support strong civil rights legislation. They must exert their influence in the area of economic justice. Economic insecurity strangles the physical and cultural growth of its victims. Not only are millions deprived of formal education and proper health facilities, but our most fundamental social unit, the family, is tortured, corrupted, and weakened by economic injustice. The church cannot look with indifference upon these glaring evils. The church must also insist within its worship that worship these. I promise I can read cursive. Understanding, goodwill, that the major something. This is the model for appearances and appraisal. Something. Which person must save his soul? But those of us who have been on the oppressed end of the old order must be equally determined to go into the new age with love and understanding. To these we must add the dimension of forgiveness. We must realize that the forgiving act must always be initiated by the person who has been wronged, the victim of some great hurt, the recipient of some torturous injustice, the absorber of some terrible act of oppression. The wrongdoer may request forgiveness. He may come to himself and, like the prodigal son, move up some dusty road, his heart palpitating with the desire for forgiveness. But only the injured neighbor can really pour out the warm waters of forgiveness. This is why my personal conviction that the most potent instrument the Negro community can use to gain total emancipation in America is that of nonviolent resistance. The evidence of the last few years supports my faith that through the use of nonviolence, much can be done to raise the Negro to a sense of self-respect and human dignity. It instills in him the nerve to challenge segregation and discrimination in whatever form they exist. Nonviolence in so many ways has given the Negro a new sense of somebodyness. But not only has nonviolence given the Negro a new image of himself, it has also thwarted the growth of bitterness. It has helped to diminish long repressed feelings of anger and frustration. In the course of respecting the discipline of the nonviolent way, the Negro has learned that he must love the adversary who inflicts the system upon him. He learns in the midst of his determined effort to end segregation that a commitment to nonviolence demands respect for the personhood of his opponent. And seeing as the language around all of this, while segregation in and of itself is technically illegal, a lot of this still rings true today, unfortunately. But, a lot of the language has changed, so I do feel a little bit uncomfortable reading this. But I'm doing my best to read his words. Now, the love referred to here is not something soft and anemic. It is not emotional bosh. It is not spineless sentimentality which refuses to take courageous action against evil for fear someone might get hurt or be offended. Love is treating fellow men as persons, understanding them with all their good and bad qualities, and treating them as potential saints. It is helping people with no thought of receiving anything in return. It is love facing evil with an infinite capacity to take it without flinching, to overcome the world by the cross. I believe that this is the type of love that must guide us through this rather turbulent period of transition. It will cause us to enter the new age, which is emerging with a wholesome attitude. We will seek to rise from a position of disadvantage to one of advantage, thus subverting justice. We will not seek to substitute one tyranny for another. We will be imbued with the conviction that a philosophy of black supremacy is as injurious as a philosophy of white supremacy. God is not interested merely in the freedom of black men and brown men and yellow men. God is interested in the freedom of the whole human race. I am happy to say that the nonviolent movement in America has come not from secular forces, but from the heart of the Negro Church. This moment has done a great deal to revitalize the Negro Church and to give its message a relevant and authentic ring. The great principles of love and justice which stand at the center of the nonviolent movement are deeply rooted in our Judeo-Christian heritage. A final challenge that faces the churches is to lead men along the path of true integration, something the law cannot do. We will not have true integration until men and women are obedient to that which cannot be enforced by law. Dr. Harry Emerson Fosdick has made an impressive distinction between enforceable and unenforceable obligations. The former are regulated by the codes of society and the vigorous implementation of law enforcement agencies. Breaking these obligations, spelled out on thousands of pages in law books, has filled numerous prisons. But unenforceable obligations are beyond the reach of the laws of society. They concern inner attitudes, genuine person-to-person relations, and expressions of compassion which law books cannot regulate and jails cannot rectify. Such obligations are met by one's commitment to an inner law, written on the heart. Man-made laws assure justice, but a higher law produces love. No code of conduct ever compelled a father to love his children or a husband to show affection to his wife. The law court may enforce him to provide bread for the family, but it cannot make him provide the bread of love. A good father is obedient to the unenforceable. In our nation today, a mighty struggle is taking place. It is a struggle to conquer the reign of an evil monster called segregation and its inseparable twin called discrimination. A monster that has wandered through this land for hundreds of years, stripping millions of Negro people of their sense of dignity and robbing them of their birthright of freedom. Let us never succumb to the temptation of believing that legislation and judicial decrees play only minor roles in solving this problem. Morality cannot be legislated, but behavior can be regulated. Judicial decrees may not change the heart, but they can restrain the heartless. The law cannot make an employer love the employee, but it can prevent him from refusing to hire me because of the color of my skin. The habits, if not the hearts of people, have been and are being altered every day by legislative acts, judicial decisions, and executive orders. Let us not be misled by those who argue that segregation cannot be ended by the force of law. But acknowledging this, we must admit that the ultimate solution to the race problem lies in the willingness of men to obey the unenforceable. Court orders and federal enforcement agencies are of inestimable value in achieving desegregation, but desegregation is only a partial, though necessary step toward the final goal which we seek to realize. Genuine intergroup and interpersonal living. Desegregation will break down the legal barriers and bring men together physically, but something must touch the hearts and souls of men so that they will come together spiritually, because it is natural and right. A vigorous enforcement of civil rights laws is gradually bringing an end to segregated public facilities, which have been barriers to a truly desegregated society. But it cannot bring an end to the fears, prejudice, pride, and irrationality, which are the barriers to a truly integrated society. These dark and demonic responses will be removed only as men are possessed by the invisible inner law, which etches on their hearts the conclusion that all men are brothers, and that love is mankind's most potent weapon for personal and social transformation. True integration will be achieved by men who are willingly obedient to unenforceable obligations. Here, then, is the hard challenge and the sublime opportunity to let God work in our hearts toward fashioning a truly great nation. If the church will free themselves from the shackles of a deadening status quo and, recovering their great historic mission, will speak and act fearlessly and insistently in terms of justice and peace, they will enkindle the imagination of mankind and fire the souls of men. Imbuing them with a glowing and ardent love for truth and justice, they can transform dark yesterdays of hatred into bright tomorrows of love. Men everywhere and at all times will know that our Hebraic Christian faith transformed the jangling discords of America into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. Ah, if only that were true. Any discussion of the role of the church in race relations must ultimately emphasize the need for prophecy. May the problem of race in America soon make hearts burn so that the prophets will rise up, saying, "Thus saith the Lord," and cry out as Amos did, "Let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream." The prophet must remind America of the urgency of now. The oft-repeated cliches, "the time is not ripe," "Negroes are not currently ready," are a stench in the nostrils of God. It shouldn't surprise me that people actually said that, but are you freaking kidding me? The time is always right to do what is right. Now is the time to realize the American dream. Now is the time to transform the bleak and desolate midnight of man's inhumanity to man into a glowing daybreak of justice and freedom. Now is the time to open the doors of opportunity to all of God's children. Now is the time to change the pending national elegy into a creative psalm of brotherly love. Honesty impels me to admit that this type of forthright stand is always costly and never altogether comfortable. It may mean walking through the valley of the shadow of suffering, losing a job, or having a 6-year-old daughter ask, "Daddy, why do you have to go to jail so much?" Yikes. But we are gravely mistaken if we think that religion protects us from the pain and agony of moral existence. Life is not a euphoria of unalloyed comfort and untroubled ease. Christianity has always insisted that the cross we bear precedes the crown we wear. To be a Christian, one must take up his cross, with all of its difficulties and agonizing and tension-packed content, and carry it until that very cross leaves its marks upon us and redeems us to that more excellent way which comes only through suffering. We as Christians face today that haunting statement of Whittaker Chambers. At the heart of the cross of our times lies the cold belief of millions, avowed and unavowed, that the death of religious faith is seen in nothing so much as in the fact that, in general, it has lost its power to move anyone to die for it. Every minister, priest, and rabbi must continually submit himself to that test. Now, I mean, I am somebody who does not believe in the Christian faith, but so, I don't exactly have my own cross that I believe in, but, and that's also the problem, is that a lot of Christians believe that you only get anywhere through suffering, and you shouldn't have to suffer to be worthy of life. Alright. We must make a choice. Will we continue to bless a status quo that needs to be blasted and reassure a social order that needs to be reformed? Or will we give ourselves unreservedly to God and His kingdom? Will we continue to march to the drumbeat of conformity and respectability, or will we, listening to the beat of a more distant drum, move to its echoing sounds? Will we march only by the music of time, or will we, risking criticism and abuse, march only to the soul-saving music of eternity? More than ever before, we are today challenged by the words of yesterday. Be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your minds. It is encouraging to be able to close an address to a national church body on an optimistic note. For in the past year, we have seen the Church of Jesus Christ rise up as never before and join the thunderous procession of committed souls in behalf of racial justice. One of the most inspirational moments of my life was the memorial service for the Reverend James Reeb, when an Episcopal bishop, a Methodist bishop, a Greek Orthodox archbishop, the president of the Unitarian Universalist National Conference, a Roman Catholic Monsignor, and 2 Baptist preachers conducted services in an AME church with 20 to 30 top-ranking officials of labor and civil rights organizations seated in the choir stand saying amen. I was sure that this alliance of conscience could only be a sign of the coming of a new day. Selma climaxed a spirit within the white churches which had been growing since the early days of the movement and which had really begun to bear fruit following the Birmingham movement. The summer in Mississippi and the hard work of the churches had begun to show that the church was really on the march in behalf of the least of these, God's black children. But this must be considered only the point of climax for the awakening of the slumbering moral giant. The actual work to redeem the soul of America is still before us. In spite of the progress which is being made in the field of race relations, there is still a mighty battle to be waged before the sons of want can shout for joy. Joblessness will probably increase. Housing continues to grow more critical for the teeming hordes which continue to migrate into our cities in search for jobs and opportunity. Still true. Right now, we are creating numerous problems for ourselves and our nation by the failure to provide quality integrated education in our slums and ghettos. Still true. Can the spirit of Selma continue to grow and spread to local congregations? Can the church maintain the courage of its convictions amid the hard and bitter struggle ahead? It will take more than the spontaneity which has characterized past responses by the church and the movement. Let me say finally that it must all maintain faith. We must all maintain faith in the future as we struggle to make justice a reality. We do not struggle alone, but God struggles with us. Sorry, he ends this handwritten, so I'm struggling with his handwriting. The God that we worship is not some. There is a want at the center of our faith, which reminds us that something, my energy for a day. That reminds us that something, so shape a place in Christ across. But one day that same Christ will rise us up. In a night and shortening the evil triumph, can sing more than something. We shall overcome. I struggled with that, and I read cursive, and his handwriting's better than my own. It's things like this that, are the, hey, we should be teaching handwriting in school, because then if you don't read cursive, you can't read historical documents. Because even being able to read it, everybody's handwriting looks different, so we're just looking at it going, I think this is what it says, but so many of the letters look the same. Alright, I don't have a lot to say on it. My meds are making me sleepy, but thank you very much for listening. I hope that you enjoyed my fumbling through MLK's We Will Overcome speech. As usual, if you enjoyed this, please subscribe or rate and review. And you can reach out to us as though there's more than me. Reach out to me at talkspod@gmail.com, on Facebook at Tangents on Cracked Spines Book Club, or with a voice message at anchor.fm/Tangents on Cracked Spines. Thank you again, and have a great day. Wow, this was supposed to be a mini episode.